recording. Good morning, everyone. I would say that I was calling this meeting of the Governance Committee to order, but we do not have a quorum today. The two counselors here, Councilor Lombardi and me. So we're not going to go through the agenda as written. We can't approve the minutes, but we are going to go ahead and just have a discussion so that this information is available to those who are not here today. And they can go back and watch the information from our discussion today. And so we will make sure that we share this, even though we don't have a quorum, online, so it's available to the public and to anyone else who's wanting to hear on Chapter 6. Yes, exactly. So with saying that, I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Farini, who is going to guide us through Chapter 6. And you'll see here on the agenda, which I'm going to stop sharing since we're really not following the agenda today, that we're just going through discussions of licenses for businesses, vendor parking space, hawkers and peddlers, and taxis. Okay?
Thank you. So as anyone that's looked at Chapter 6 knows, it's a very long chapter with a lot of, addresses a lot of things that seem somewhat no longer relevant to the city and how we operate. However, I did some research and what was very interesting to me is that most of the titles in Chapter 6 that are the businesses and activities licensed are the origin of that authority comes from New Hampshire state statutes for municipalities to specifically, authorize those businesses and activities. So I have a lovely little laundry list, and I'll read the list just so that the public is aware and you folks are aware without, going through the very voluminous chapter. So things like raffles, tag days, billiards, bowling, coin-operated devices, wrestling, circuses, dances, theatrical parades, open-air theaters, hawkers, peddlers, street fairs, public celebrations, pawnbrokers, and solicitation are all the origins of our authority to regulate come from 5 different statutes. And those statutes are RSA 287A, RSA 31, RSA 286, obviously RSA 4717, which is the city's authority, and RSA 102. So it kind of made me feel better about our ordinances, and it makes sense to see how our ordinances evolved because obviously the state statutes are also interspersed with different chapters and things like that. So that was just an interesting exercise. I also had the opportunity to look at a few other communities. And I think you've remembered from our prior conversations, Dover has a, quote, licensing board. So they sort of use a shorthand and reference these various statutes. Don't go through and list perhaps all of these types of activities, but then they refer everything to that licensing board. And then other cities similarly situated to us do have, the references interspersed throughout their chapters on licenses. So I found that just very interesting. I thought that's something that, is important for the committee to consider as we go forward. I don't think you can delete all of these things, but I think certainly a more streamlined way of referencing them throughout the chapter would be something we would want to do. The other thing that was very interesting in looking at how some other communities do this is Concord has a licensing services page, which was very interesting and had some, list of the various licenses. And we've talked a lot about doing something similar for the city of Portsmouth. And then on the page itself, it listed various types of things that they license. And then there was a banner on the left that had each department, various departments on the left. And I thought when we move forward, as we edit Chapter 6, it might be interesting to see some examples of some other cities and how they've organized it on their website. And also that could inform us as far as how the further edits go. What was particularly interesting in Keene, which I did not know, they have a planning, licensing, and development committee that's composed of public members of the committee as well as staff. And they have public meetings, and there are minutes, and they have addressed many of the licensing issues that Chapter 6 addresses and what would be addressed in the encumbrance permit that's coming forward. I just mentioned that for your information. I'm not advocating for anything, but it was interesting to learn that that is how one community addresses it. I think what's become apparent to me and to the committee is how much staff time and work is associated with all of our licensing and permitting. I think we heard from Public Works, who were able to express, statistics on what that is. And our administrative assistant, Barbara, helps with the liquor review, and she told me she's had over 60 liquor committee requests. Now, that's not events, that's brick and mortar businesses and all sorts of things like that. So I found it interesting that they had an actual committee. One of the things that I think will help the city moving forward in the event that the encumbrance permit ordinance passes is our use of the OpenGov system and the rules relative to that, and also converting our special events to an OpenGov permit, and some of the other things that are in the process of being similarly situated to the other permitting processes in the city. And I think because so much of that legwork is done through and will be done through the actual permit application and the questions and the Q&A, a lot of that vetting and information that might be done by a committee is done through the process itself with staff working with the applicants. But I thought it was important for the committee to know about that. And
I could ask a quick question.
Sure.
And I'm asking this for anybody who's watching this, because I think it's confusing to the non-attorneys, the difference between licensing and permitting.
right.
Yeah.
So what a license is permission to use property. And the permit that we issue is in essence a license. I mean, the simplest way to explain that, it's permission to use. And the permit has detail in it, it has certain obligations, what you're supposed to do, but it's basically an agreement. So it's basically a license to use this property for whatever the limitations are in the permit. One of the things that this committee will decide as it moves forward is, the vendor parking spaces was something that we looked at, and we haven't had anyone avail themselves of that in our ordinances. And so when this committee reconvenes in January, that's something that is in existing, Chapter 6 that I'm sure the committee will decide on a policy basis and review, whether that's something to continue or expand or change in any way. Hawkers and peddlers, you really kind of think of your history, when there used to be many more door-to-door salespeople, and the interest in regulating, how that's done. Now we have computers on the internet to do a lot of our shopping. So those are really have, old origins, but we still do get some requests for folks to go door to door, and there is some just generic solicitation is something that we have the authority to regulate. And as we move forward in reviewing this chapter, it's something that the committee will look at again. Do we need as many pages and drafted in the language that it is? No, we can certainly be more mindful. of, our current practices. And then taxis, it was interesting to learn that all of the municipalities I checked still retained their taxi ordinances. Most of them were shorter than ours. Dover's was very, very short. It was a reference to the licensing board that they have, so it was like a page. And most of them, Concord, Rochester, Keene, they had, medium length. And so I thought that was interesting. They hadn't gone away completely, but like the hawkers and the vendors and hawkers, I think there's a way to simplify and streamline, the portion of the taxi ordinance in Chapter 6 as we move forward. And that's really all I had to report. I don't know, Council Lombardi, if you have some thoughts.
One of the things you mentioned was the committee in Dover, was it?
Yes, yeah. Well, they have a licensing board. It was Keene that actually has a committee.
Committee
Yeah.
with residents on it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think we satisfy that with public comment, don't we? I mean,
Oh, yeah, it's on
except that,
well,
except they're not voting,
right.
so.
Well, I think if the encumbrance ordinance passes as drafted, how we've addressed that is the monthly, the report back to the council. You're going to have transparency in the list that you're getting. And then by accepting that report, it's endorsing the action. So the council is going to actually maybe have more of a regular communication about encumbrances, but perhaps less direct approval because we've expanded some of the encumbrances versus the licenses, which will
Right.
still go forward in the normal, ordinary course. So, I think we kind of acknowledged, the council's, the council action piece of it, and also the transparency piece, and the ability for the public to comment, because that report will be in the packet. So if, you're right, that we
Yeah,
can
it just-
definitely, yep,
I think it might be a good idea, but I think we cover it.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm saying, yeah.
and I think the licensing board is the statutory board. I think it's like, for Dover, I think it's the police chief, the city manager, I don't know who the third staff person is, but that is a staff board, whereas the Keene board was, as we described. Yeah.
Well, and we already handle things, while it may not be a formal board, we do handle events that way,
Right. Exactly,
The city manager has a set of staff
right,
that comes together to discuss all events and encumbrances on city streets when it's an event related. So we do have that in place. It's just not it's not formally in our ordinance the way
Right.
that is set up.
and we have the liquor review committee too, which is a offshoot of that as well. So we do have process, I guess, is the best way, and it's a thorough process.
Do you see any advantage to providing that information somewhere in the ordinance so that it's clear that that there is a review process and that it happens internally so that residents understand that? Because I don't know if people understand that there is a process and it is reviewed by multiple individuals. You hear a lot of complaints and things about, events. Did they even ask the police if they could do this? Did they even, and as a city councilor, that there's this
Right.
internal process that happens. But I don't know if our residents all understand that we have those processes in place. I think we leave it to the city manager to make that call. I'm just wondering if it's worth outlining somewhere in, specifically in Chapter 6 under theatricals, parades, open air, like, I
Open air
think that, or
meetings, yeah.
open air meetings, or somewhere, if it's worth laying out, the city manager will put together a team of, of staff that are, impacted by any event, or,
Under the proposed encumbrance ordinance that's coming forward a week from today,
Yes.
we do note in the ordinance language currently, that because these events take place on public property, they require significant municipal service support
Right.
that may include but not be limited to police details, inspections from fire and building, So we do have that sort of laundry list of who is involved.
Yes.
And I also note that in there that the city's liquor review committee, which is a prerequisite, it is also part of that approval process, and then lists the other permits. So there is a sort of a reference of the team, but not saying, specifically, when we meet, we review, and it goes
Right.
through either OpenGov or in person.
Well, and I don't want to tie the city manager to having a specific team, but at the same time, because every event's different, every license is different, but maybe we're just noting somewhere that the city manager, makes a call on which team members have to make these decisions or something, so that it's really clear how this process works.
It's part of her overall authority to regulate and control what happens on city property.
Exactly, exactly.
And, but then acknowledge there are a lot of things called special events that happen on city property. And there is an internal process for that.
Right. I think that that's really key, because I think people don't always understand like and maybe it's clear, maybe we make it really clear what the process is for somebody applying.
You'll see, and it gets up on I'm not sure where it lives on our website, or if it's
Yeah.
obvious, and then with this conversion to OpenGov, for the applications, I think it's gonna be more prominent on the website,
I think so too, and I think that's where we need to start saying you will apply, like, maybe we update language so it says you're gonna apply on the website for special, because right now people will call and say, I don't know what do I do? I'm having this event, I don't know what to do.
Yep.
And I'll say, will you send a letter to the city manager's office? Because that's been the process, you send a
Right.
letter.
Yeah, but this will be more structured, I think, on the
Yeah.
website, once we're ready to go into OpenGov.
So maybe it would be helpful to have a reference to that, and I know we don't have this capability yet, but we'd like to get there where we embed links
Right.
in the ordinances so that you can go, oh, I can click here and go to, and it takes me to that site. I know we don't have that yet, but
Those are excellent comments. Just so you know, we have had a group of staff that have spoken to every department that deals with special events. We are just finishing that up. We have a draft permit. Then we're going to release that internally to staff to tweak it. And then we're going to invite members of the public, certain members of the public to kind of test it as well. And then there'll be a lot of outreach and the creation of the appropriate website. So all of those issues have come up as well from staff, you have to have 8 different, sometimes 5 different permits for, one event. It's very confusing for the public. And so I think that a lot of those comments about a landing page are really important for the public, and so they can get as much information as they can. We're also going to have Q&A, questions and answers, and different guidance documents that will appear when we do roll this out. So I think that will be a big improvement for the public to be able to access that. It's in the works.
yeah, it's wonderful that we're starting to get these processes in place, because it is very opaque right now. You write a letter, then you don't know what happens. Do you come to the city council and talk when the letter comes before the council? Do you not? Like how?
Yes.
And usually they're all just kind of approved, for the city manager to act. We're changing that process. That's not gonna happen anymore. But then for people to know exactly what they need to do is challenging, yeah.
And one of the thoughts that we had is the OpenGov is actually helping the applicant with the application itself, so that they've populated everything and that there's a standardized form that goes to council. So that, sometimes you have really detailed people who've been doing it for years and they can do it in their sleep, and then you have brand new people who may not include all the information for the council, and I'm sure it's frustrating for the applicant, I'm sure it's frustrating for the council, but we're hoping to just standardize that so that through OpenGov, everyone can comment, they have everything they need, then it goes. And that way, it will take the guesswork, hopefully, out of it, and they will have had guidance before they've even come to council.
That's great. I had one other thing, I mean, clearly we're gonna have to update some of this language, coin-operated amusement devices, or, you know, so many of them are not coin-operated now, like,
It's
some
true.
it's like, you know, just the way that things have evolved and
Absolutely,
changed,
yes.
I don't know, some of these,
The language,
yes, language is going to have to change. And we also have, and some of the licensing, I'm sure that this has been challenging, is we have spaces now that weren't envisioned
Yes.
before, entertainment spaces, like we have axe throwing. I'm sure that was like, where is that? How do we license that? You know, and spaces that aren't just billiards and aren't just, you know, they're multi-entertainment spaces. I think we have at least a few of those in the city. I think maybe 3 now. You know, how do you license that? And escape rooms, and I'm sure that there were questions. So when we have to license places and it's not really clear, I think there's just some things we're missing currently.
Good
and
to
may-
capture those in our.
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of licensing we need. I mean, I'm sure that our inspections team had to figure that out.
Exactly,
Right.
and planning and inspection had to figure out, what is this?
Yeah, what is this and how do I license it?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So it would be nice if it was really clear for anyone. And if there's anything else that we're maybe not thinking about and missing, you know, so we have taxi licensing, right? But then the question becomes, you know, do we look at Uber and Lyft, and like, do we have some kind of, not licensing around that, but maybe we need to talk about that in relation to the parking, parking, traffic and safety ordinance as well. Because if we don't have an existing taxi, and do we allow an Uber or Lyft person to apply for a taxi stand license? You know, there are all these, because the world is evolving faster than our laws can keep up.
Right. My recollection is that we don't regulate Uber, and the state hasn't permitted us to regulate
Regulate it,
Uber
yeah.
or Lyft. But you raise a good question when we're looking at the taxi ordinance. You know, a taxi is a taxi, is it the medallions and all of that? It's a very different form of transport than, you know, Lyft and Uber. So that's something to consider when we're looking at the revisions for the taxi. But yeah, there are these things that none of this contemplates.
Yes, yes. And so, do we, you know, I just have questions about, like, do we try to get ahead of some of this and try to provide some kind of guidance for how we address it or not? And I don't, you know, without the state law providing that. I mean, can we provide some general, like, oh, well, if PTS decides to let Uber park in a, you know, in a taxi spot without, you know, we're not going to oppose that, you know, we're not gonna, because they're not licensed, or are we, you know, because I think we can regulate parking locally. So this is the kind of, how do they make that call if there's no license? I don't know. Currently, what they've done is they've taken the spot away because we don't have a licensed taxi.
Right.
But who knows? But not having a licensed taxi is a disadvantage.
For some.
You know, and maybe you want to have a space that's dedicated, that we're allowed to provide parking for Lyft or Uber. Or maybe we want to allow them to provide parking for Uber Eats, or, you know, some of the delivery that no one envisioned either. And so,
Well, except they, you know, they fall under, if they're delivering, they fall under delivery zoning, right?
I think they do, but I don't know if they do. I mean, because they're not a business.
They're not a truck, but they're delivering.
They should be able to pull
Yeah.
So they can double park.
Yeah, can they pull a permit for the spaces downtown that are for delivery? And
I don't
I don't
know.
know.
I haven't figured that out.
I don't know either. So this is the kind of thing that I'm like, do we need to provide some language that even though, you know, that we can, so that there's flexibility, not to tell PTS to allow that, but so that PTS could allow that if they wanted to allow that.
Basically, the difference between taxi and Uber is that taxis hang around and wait, wait.
Yeah.
But Uber, because all their calls are, done online, I mean, they just pretty much keep moving. I mean, that's how they make money, is keep moving.
But it's interesting, in some cities at this stage, you can have a licensed taxi that uses Uber, which is something that we found out in Paris. Almost all they're all licensed taxis, but they also use Uber.
That was
So-
true in New Orleans.
Yeah.
They were taxis, but they also operate under Uber.
Yeah, so you kind of, how do you,
My understanding is that we haven't had any taxis because of the insurance cost is cost prohibitive for an independent taxi driver. That's what I've heard as feedback.
I guess I can imagine that.
I can see that the liability insurance would be very
Yes.
high.
But-
So,
Why is that not true of Uber?
We
They-
don't regulate them.
yes, they don't have to carry specialized insurance. And
Or
they
or
would be
do
wise
it on-
to.
As an umbrella, I don't know if nationally, if, anybody
You have to
knows.
have a commercial license to drive an Uber?
No,
So that's a part of it then.
yeah. But then, I mean, if that's the direction that the world is moving, at the same time, you don't want to also cut off convenience for residents or.
Right.
So then, so how do we address that in ways so that there's flexibility? That's all my own
Thinking, yeah.
question on that, like, I'm not gonna try to license them. Just, how do we allow decision-making around some of those changes in our society? And do we comment on it in our licensing in chapter 6, where we can't issue licenses for, but, I don't know.
Yeah, I can
It's
check
really
with,
a legal question for you guys, how we
can also
address that.
check with the parking folks. I know we have an ordinance that allows stopping for deliveries, for X amount of minutes, and then we also have the businesses that can do it. So it would be interesting to know, like, how do you deal with this? What happens? What are you observing? So we have some information about what's currently being done.
I mean, like florists deliver.
Right, exactly. Same kind of thing. Like Uber Eats, same kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, how many of them though actually pay for the yearly permit?
I don't know.
For
I doubt it.
the loading zones?
I don't know.
I think a lot of them probably don't, and you have to have a commercial license for the loading zone, I know that.
Do you?
So if you don't,
Business.
you have to have a business
business.
license, yeah. And if you don't, then you can't get a permit for the loading zone, so,
Well, that explains,
yeah. So I think the Uber Eats drivers take a risk, and a lot of them get tickets, and they get frustrated. So this is a question I have around.
Great questions.
And, I think that's it. The only other thing I hear complaints about is the dog licensing.
That one I didn't list, and it's in there, and I know we still need to do it. I haven't had a chance to talk to the clerk about that, but I think we can certainly simplify that language as well.
Well, I'm wondering if we can simplify processes too now, because a lot of people, you have to get they get a letter in the mail if they forget to license their dog.
It was just last year, there was a new ordinance passed, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if we can simplify it for the clerk's office and at the same time not trigger frustration, because if you're only paying, it's like $5 or something to license your dog.
yeah.
The city's paying how much to send out the certified letters? Like for the, like,
Doesn't seem.
at some point, you're like, okay, how do we better manage this? Yeah, so that
Do
we're
they
not.
have to have a certified letter?
I think they have to, or something, like if you don't pay within a certain time frame, they send a, that was the complaint that people got, and then you're fined, and
It's
it goes
really
up to like,
designed to ensure that they all have their rabies
Yeah.
shots, right?
Yeah,
exactly,
They have their tag, so.
and so maybe there's an easier way for everyone, I don't know if there is, or maybe not, that might be
Right.
the best way to do
Right.
it, but.
Must be also a state statute that regulates all of that.
Yeah, that was just
Yeah.
changed, yeah.
Yeah. And some of these things we're not doing, but I would hate to take them off the books and then suddenly,
Right.
model car slot racing, you know, I mean, I don't think that's happening, but, it's just one of those, like, I don't think we have much boxing and wrestling beyond the high school wrestling team.
We had a wrestling permit last year?
Did
Yes,
we?
We did,
Okay,
One
we
race.
did.
Oh, is it one race? Yeah.
okay,
Believe it or not,
all right, circus, we haven't had a circus in a
no,
long
many,
time.
many years,
But you'd hate to pull it and then suddenly have
right.
no regulations.
I also had a chat with the city clerk, but I can I can get feedback from her about whether, how recent any of these licenses have come forward when we address this, so we know what we still are asked for, what's happening in the city, what kind of applications we're getting for these things.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm fascinated by like solicitors and magazine subscriptions, that kind of thing. And
I just had someone call about going door to door with real estate brochures.
you mean
interesting.
Just to,
someone wanting to do it or someone complaining about it?
no, they wanna do it, they wanna see if they can do it, knock on doors to solicit business for real estate purposes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So this is,
Right.
we don't, from what I know of, usually the only people who knock on your door to solicit anything are high schoolers selling something for the high school, for their
Okay.
teams.
Solar power,
Solar power, yeah.
roofing,
Have it.
Roofing, gutters,
yep, gutters, yep. If anybody's working in the neighborhood, then they end up coming
Oh.
around to say, would you
yeah,
like
I
us
get
to?
that.
Oh, wow. I think I've only ever had Fidium Fiber do that. Because they were working
Yeah, they
across the
do it
street.
too, yeah.
They do it. I think it's common if they're working in the neighborhood, they walk around to see if anybody else wants that service.
Okay. It's interesting.
But technically, should they be licensed? Should they get background checks from the PD?
Because that was in the ordinance, that particular solicitation for the magazine subscriptions, there was that.
Yeah.
There was a requirement and a registration process, and
There's also Jehovah's Witnesses.
Having just finished canvassing a lot of doors
did they have signs?
for an election, yeah. One of the things what I thought was interesting is that people don't make a distinction between political canvassing and solicitation, and maybe we need to include a distinction because by law, you're allowed to politically canvass, and it's not considered solicitation. So that should be clear in our ordinance so people understand that. There is one neighborhood in town that if you go into that neighborhood, there's a woman who will come out and yell at you and say, no solicitation on you, like, I'm allowed to do this. She'll keep yelling at you, and so you just decide it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Every time. But it would be nice to be really clear that this does not apply to, and who it does not apply to, because
That's a good point.
it's all these,
Something.
is always something, right? I think that's all my thoughts on it. Do you have any others?
Well, I know that the guy across the street and I have talked about many times about using Aldrich Road as a buggy, homemade, non-powered racetrack
Oh,
you know, for kids, you know, they
Yeah.
make their little,
they're little
The
cars.
boxcar
Cars.
derbies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I did that in Scouts with my kids.
it's fun.
Yeah, it is.
And Aldrich would be great, it has a nice hill, some bumps in it now, you know.
It's perfect. I love it. Well, they could pull a permit to close the road.
That's right.
Yeah,
For
A
that.
special event.
Yeah, it's a special event permit. You could pull a special event permit. You know, yeah, I'm constantly reminded of all the living on a little tiny road. I have a neighbor who's been paving and had to get signs put up from the city because of that. So this is how we have to know what all the rules are. Everyone does, so that we can all understand each other and work together. So,
but one question I have, and this doesn't relate to this, I don't think, anyway, but in our neighborhood, there's been a lot of tree cutting. And there was like one instance, well, there, you know, there's a little bog behind Aldrich Road. And
Is
there
it a
was
wetlands?
wetlands, yeah.
Is it considered a wetland?
Yeah. And from Friday to Sunday, there was constant tree cutting. And
Oh,
a lot of us look at, well, yeah, what is going on? Just, you know, I don't think they ever got a permit to do that. And then, you
they
know,
would not, they'd have to go to the Concom. That's a violation of state and local ordinance. State law and local ordinance to cut in the wetlands.
yeah, well, I don't know if they were, but, you know, but the wetland is right there, and I don't know what the buffer is for that wetland there, you know, so. You know, it's like,
The planners might be calling you.
but this is the kind of thing people don't know about that they should know
it was
about.
just alarming because it was all weekend, literally all weekend,
It's very frustrating.
yes.
We have limitations on hours of construction, but that's different, you know, that's a different service.
Yeah, I had to call a few weeks ago because I had a neighbor who was jackhammering out an old floor in a garage, and the next door neighbor said, I mean, it was all day for 4 days. And the next door neighbor said, you know, what are the hours? Right? So I think it's really important to know, what the hours are, what the limitations are, for things like this, because it's loud.
Yeah,
When someone's cutting a tree or jackhammering anything or.
or mowing, these huge mowers and weed whackers,
Yeah.
incredible noise,
We get a lot of complaints about leaf blowers too.
yeah.
Which I don't know that leaf blowers ever, I think some of them are probably louder than what's allowed
Oh,
by
yeah.
the
Decibel?
decibel allowed, but you have to catch it happening. You have to be there to know, so by the time you call out somebody, it's challenging.
By the time Jason arrives, they're
Yeah.
done.
They're done and they're gone, because it's 10 minutes, you
Yep.
know, it's not, jackhammering is a different
True.
situation, or tree cutting is a different situation.
People have these less than quarter acre yards that these machines come in, just do it in, you know, 2 minutes.
Yeah, very loud,
I don't get it.
I know.
It's no fun.
I do have some questions about this ordinance and some of the things that once we start going through it in more detail about like who the city license off, all the qualifications of the
Right.
city licensing officer and all of that stuff. I think it's interesting that it was in here, but at this stage, I think that's all the city license officer is hired by the city manager. And that's it. Like, I don't know that some of these things are required.
I think it's a carryover from the authority, and I think that that's how it began. but there's very interesting qualifications for applicants. I don't know if you got, but
Yeah.
that will be edited. You need to take a look at that as well.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
All of that section needs to be reworked.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was
Yes.
like, we don't need 3 pages on.
No.
On what all of your status needs to be a city licensing officer, that seems like a lot. But I guess that was back when we probably only had 1 or 2 people doing this work.
Right, and,
Application of applicants, procedure for issuance,
goes on and on.
It does.
enforcement.
And I think that when I was looking at Concord, the licensing services page, and you'll have the different, hopefully the different departments and the different things that each department, they're all really licensing, these permits. They're overseeing, they're processing through OpenGov, but each department has an area of expertise in certain things. And the clerk's office is the office that was the licensing agent and has the businesses that are in some of these activities that we've talked about today.
Okay, all right, so maybe we can really clean that up and just say
Yes.
who's the responsible party.
Right, simplify it.
Okay, all right, good. All right, do you have anything else? I think
No.
we should let everyone go.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming today and sharing some insights into chapter 6, and the next governance committee meeting is currently scheduled for December 15th. And hopefully we will be able to we'll have a quorum there so we can approve these final minutes and get some progress and set a timeline for meetings for next year, because that has been a request of the clerk's office, that we set a clear timeline for exactly when all of our meetings will occur next year. And I will talk to the mayor about who he thinks might be serving on this committee, so that maybe we can invite them
Oh,
to
that
the
would be
committee
great.
in December, so that they can at least listen in.
So I just deleted the December 22nd meeting,
Yes,
and I marked it as this and all following meetings.
Aww.
I'm sorry. We've got you for one more meeting, December 15th. And we're thrilled that we've got you for one more meeting, but we will miss you. So with that said, I think that we're good for the day. We're